you are. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Mr. Rodder's Neighborhood. Last week where we left off, we had just pulled the intake on the intake manifold on the Clevor Ford here in our Thunderbird. I realized I was going to have to get some different spacers, a few things like that. So I got some parts ordered and they came in. So Price Motorsports out of Hope, Indiana, they make this nice little valley pan and spacer plate to put on essentially a 4-barrel Cleveland. They actually have for all kinds of different Ford varieties, but this one is specifically made for the 4-barrel Cleveland intake manifold on a 4-barrel Cleveland head on a 9.5 deck Windsor block. So we got this nice little valley pan and these spacers. Now what I have noticed is this is intended to be installed when you're building the engine. It's beveled here on both edges so that it'll slide directly under the heads. Like we slide it on before you install the heads and then you put it in place. I'm on the other end of the spectrum here where the heads are already on and I have to install this. So the easiest thing to do for me to do is I'm going to shave part of this bevel off so that it doesn't fit under the head exactly perfectly, but it gives me enough wiggle room to finagle it in there and drop it into place. Once I get it dropped in place, these holes here need to be drilled into the China rail, so I'll have to figure out some way I'm going to drill the holes into the China rails and tap them and then install the hardware to hold this valley cover in place while the engine's in the car and it's all together. Okay, this is generally something you don't want to do, but in this case I don't have an option. So you try to make as little mess as possible, but I mean it is going to be difficult to try to keep all the metal shavings out of the valley, the lifter valley there. I am going to have to work extra hard on trying to collect them and get them all out because I definitely don't want all these metal shavings, especially cast iron, floating around in the block. So I'm going to try to get this valley pan fitted today and hopefully installed. That's going to be our big hurdle so we can get the intake manifold back on. The other thing is my intake manifold, the bolts are essentially for a 9.2 deck Cleveland block. They're cast into the intake manifold to where everything lines up. But the problem you run into when you run a 9.5 deck block is the deck height is taller, essentially by 1/4 inch on each side, meaning that the bolt holes would then move outward about 1/4 inch. I will have to figure out how to how to open up the holes on the intake manifold without eliminating the bosses and still have enough room to get everything installed and bolted down and held into place. Like I said before in the previous video, the good thing is the only thing we're looking at is it's a dry intake manifold, so there's no water in this situation. So even if you don't get it 100% dead on, your ports, as long as they seal, will work. So that's what we're looking at today. We're going to try to get this valley cover installed and see where I can go from there. So stick around. Okay, so I got the valley pan attached. There's 4 holes I had to drill into the China rail here. 2 of them, you can't really see them all that well with the camera angle, but there's 4 holes here in the China rail, and I had drilled and tapped them all to a 10/32 screw. And now I'm going to attach the China rail, now I'm going to attach the valley pan for the last time. All right, so I'm going to clean it up really good, the whole entire China rail with some acetone. Allow it to adhere really well, allow the RTV to set up well on the China rail. All right, so I'm going to use a bit of the right stuff here. so there we go. There's our installed valley pan. Okay, it's day 4 of me putting on this Cleveland intake manifold on the 427 Clevor and the 88 Thunderbird. I was going to do just one video on it, and then I ended up just having to grind a whole bunch on the spacers to get everything to fit. But instead, what I did is just I kind of just didn't have a video of the grinding to make the spacers work. I ended up just kind of fitting them into place, opening up some of the holes that I needed to, and then I opened up the holes in the intake manifold, and now I got it installed. I still need to get 4 extra bolts for the center, and other than that though, I got it it's on there. I ran into a problem with the fuel rails. They were considerably long, and they were putting the fuel rail up in the firewall. So now I'm having to modify my previous fuel rails to fit the intake manifold, which is not really a problem. All the ports and stuff are all centered, so at least it goes on there. I just need to figure out some way to attach it. So that's what I'm working on now. So let's flip the camera around and see where I'm at. Okay, so this side fuel rail I've actually completed. There was, if you can't quite see them, studs, and then shims and a bolt down here to attach it to this piece of aluminum, front and rear, to hold the fuel rail in place. On the other side, it's not done yet, and I actually wanted to do one side just so I could show you, well, I could actually learn to make sure it was going to work well. It's just sitting on here, right? There's nothing holding it in place. There's nothing drilled, nothing like that. So I kind of wanted to show how I did it, if it was going to work, because if it didn't work, I didn't want to look like a moron. So what I did was, I took the fuel rails. Each one of them is numbered from side to side because they were originally fitted for that side. So what I did is, you find this rail here is the 1-2 fuel rail. That's how they numbered them when I had it made. And these are considerably shorter, but you can still see the clearance issues with the firewall. It's going to be tight, but I can get the fuel line on there, and it does have about 1/4 of an inch of clearance on it after it's on. So it should be good to go once I get it bolted down. But if we zoom over here to the table, okay, so let me grab the 1-2 fuel rail here, which is this one. Okay, all right, so you can't quite see, but see, this one was fabricated. It says 1 here and 2 here, which is actually the driver's side. So it says intake side inward. So this would be the rear. This side over here, number 1 would be the rear. Okay, so I'll show you how I did this. All I did was take a piece of masking tape, laid it down on all 4 of the ports for the injectors plus those 2 holes, and then I just made a rubbing template of it. And as long as I line up the 4 holes on the fuel rail, everything should be pretty much in place to make it work. So I'm gonna shut the camera off here, and I'm gonna put the tape on. I'll make a rubbing, and I'll show you what I did. All right, so here's the rubbing done on this masking tape. And like I said, all of the holes for the injectors are essentially in the same place. So all I have to do is line up those injector rubbings on the other fuel rail, and I'll know where to put my holes to drill and tap for my studs. So I marked it here, 1 being the rear and 2 being the front half of the injector rail on the driver's side. So here we go. Now I'm just going to pull the tape off and transfer it over. So now I got my rubbing transferred over to the other fuel rail. What I did find on this one, that a lot of the holes weren't exactly in the same spot. I tried to get them the best I could, but I had to split the difference on some of them. And this one's, you can see, is quite far off. It's maybe 1/8 of an inch. And this one here is about 1/8 of an inch the other way. So I guess apparently you can have them off quite a bit and they still sit on there all right. But I'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and get a punch, and I'm going to mark where these holes are at,
and then start drilling and get ready to tap. Now, what you'll find is you can drill into this thing pretty far, but I'm not going to go all that far. Maybe just about 3/8 of an inch. Just enough to get some threads to hold the stud. All right, so give me a few minutes and I'll get that done. All right, so here's our finished product, 1 and 2. This is 1 down here, 2 down here. All I did was, once I tapped them, I just ran the file over it just to clean the boogers off, because it'll actually stretch the metal right there in the hole when it's trying to pull the tap. So I just filed it down so that way it's flush when it sits. And we'll go ahead and piece it together and put it together on our intake manifold. So there we are, mounted up. It's got some washer and a 9-lock nut on the bottom, so that way it doesn't come loose, vibrate loose. And our line clears. I got about 1/4 of an inch. You can see underneath that pinch weld. It gets awfully tight at that pinch weld, but it still has plenty of clearance. It's a solid motor mount motor. Had I known what I was doing way back when, I probably would have put motor plates in it, but it just has solid motor mounts, so it actually sits off to the center. Like, it's not quite straight, as you can see there. And that's just the Team Z solid motor mounts. Unfortunately, they don't fit too well. Now this one had a little bit more of a clearance issue than what I thought it was going to. It's caught up on my dipstick tube here, but I don't think that really matters much, to tell you the truth. Because in reality it's a flexible tube, and this is a race car. I mean, it literally just makes a pass, doesn't get driven a lot of miles, but they're solid, they're on there. Whole car shakes, and that's what it took just to get the fuel rails on. So we'll see what happens when I start figuring out where this fuel pressure regulator is going to go. And that's it for this episode of Mr. Ryder's Neighborhood. I'll see you later.